That was the strange thing about greatness. By the time the world sees it, someone else usually saw it first. And in Phil Collins' case, that someone was not a producer, not a record executive, not a stadium crowd, and not even the band that would one day help make him famous. It was a theater teacher from his childhood, a woman who helped take a noisy, curious, complicated little boy and place him in front of a stage light before he had any idea what that light would eventually cost him or give him. By then, of course, Phil was already Phil Collins, the voice behind Heartbreak, the drummer whose fills felt like explosions of feeling, the man whose songs had followed people through divorces, regrets, lonely drives, and quiet nights when sleep would not come. He had become one of those rare artists whose voice sounded less like performance and more like confession. People heard him and felt as if they were hearing a part of themselves. But none of that begins in the spotlight people remember. It begins far earlier, in childhood, in uncertainty, in the fragile little moments that could so easily disappear if no one notices them. And maybe that is why the memory stayed with him. As a boy in London, Phil was the kind of child who seemed to carry rhythm in his body before he had the language to explain it. He was drawn to performance the way some children are drawn to the sea, not because it was safe, not because it was sensible, but because something in it called to him. There were children who could sit still and wait to be told who they were going to become. Phil did not seem built that way. There was movement in him, restlessness, sensitivity, a need to turn feeling into sound, gesture, expression. That kind of child can be difficult to understand. To some adults, he may have seemed distracted, too energetic, too emotional, too eager. But every now and then, a teacher comes along who sees that what looks like chaos is really a beginning. What looks like noise is really a gift trying to find its shape. His theater teacher saw it, not just talent. Plenty of people can recognize talent. She saw hunger, imagination, the peculiar seriousness that lives inside children who take pretending very seriously because somewhere deep down they already know it is not pretending at all. It is escape, it is relief, it is identity, it is survival. She did not just give him lines to say, she gave him permission to step forward, permission to try, permission to believe that the feelings inside him had somewhere to go. And that kind of permission can change an entire life. Years passed, and life moved the way it always does, faster than anyone expects. The little boy became a young performer. The young performer became a working musician. The working musician became part of Genesis. Then came the impossible transformation, the one that almost never works the way it did for him. He was not just the drummer anymore. He became the voice. Then somehow he became something even bigger than that. A solo star, a man filling arenas, a face known all over the world, a voice that could break your heart in 3 notes. But the higher he rose, the more complicated life became. Success does not arrive alone. It brings pressure, distance, misunderstanding. It turns private pain into public entertainment. It asks for more and more until even a man who seems untouchable starts to look tired. Phil Collins knew that better than most. The divorces, the headlines, the loneliness behind the success, the strange burden of writing songs so honest that millions loved them while the man who wrote them still had to live through what inspired them. By the time people were singing along to his pain, he was already carrying the next wound. And yet beneath all of it, buried under decades of fame, there remained the memory of where it started. A teacher, a stage, a child being told, in one way or another, you belong here. That is what made the moment so powerful years later. because this was not simply nostalgia. This was not some polished trick for the audience. This was not a celebrity casually thanking an old influence because it sounded gracious. No, this felt deeper than that. It felt unfinished, like a circle Phil had carried inside him for years, waiting for the right night to close. The concert had already been moving. The crowd had come for the songs they knew by heart, the songs that had outlived decades, songs that had become memory markers in people's lives. First love, first heartbreak, a marriage falling apart, a long drive home after bad news, a quiet Sunday afternoon when the past suddenly came back. Phil's music had a way of sitting beside people in those moments. That is why they kept coming back to him. Not because he was polished, because he was human. And then, somewhere in the middle of the performance, the mood shifted. Phil slowed down. The arena, used to cheering, began to listen more closely. There was something in his voice now that was not part of the usual rhythm of the show. He looked out at the audience, but not in the way performers usually do when they are working a room. This was different. This was a man reaching backward through time, and people could feel it before they understood it. He began to speak about childhood, about beginnings, about the strange truth that no one rises alone, no matter how alone success can make them feel. He spoke of someone who had mattered before the records, before the tours, before the fame had hardened into history. Someone who had believed in him when belief was still a fragile thing. The room grew quieter. Then he said he wanted to honor that person. There are moments at concerts when the audience expects surprise, and there are moments when surprise suddenly becomes something else entirely, something tender, something exposed. This was one of those moments, because the person Phil Collins called to the stage was not another star, not a famous collaborator, not a friend the crowd recognized from television or tabloid photographs. It was the teacher who had helped start it all. And when she appeared, the emotion in the room changed. You could almost feel the years collapse. The audience did not just see an older woman walking onto a stage. They saw the invisible architecture of a life. They saw how fame, for all its scale, is still built from small rooms and quiet encouragement and ordinary people who choose to say the right thing at the right time. They saw the hidden hand behind the legend, the person who helped open the first door. Phil's face said more than his words could. There was pride there, yes, gratitude too, but also something more vulnerable, something like a child still living inside the man, a child who had never forgotten being seen. That is what made the moment hit so hard, because for all the years, all the success, all the songs about pain and distance and loss, here was a man standing in the center of his own legacy and quietly admitting that before the world ever applauded him, one teacher did. And maybe in some ways that applause mattered most. He introduced her not like a prop in the show, but like a missing chapter in his own story. The crowd responded with warmth, but what they really reacted to was the truth in front of them. Phil Collins, the giant, was suddenly also Phil Collins, the schoolboy. The legend and the child were standing there at the same time. That does not happen often. People spend their whole lives trying to hide the child inside them once success arrives. Phil, on that night, did the opposite. He let the audience see exactly where he came from. And it was beautiful because it was so simple. No special effect could have made it stronger. No headline could have made it truer. It was only gratitude, real gratitude, the kind that grows over years and waits for the right moment to speak. You have to understand what that means in a life like his. Phil Collins was not just successful. He was consumed by success. People wanted the songs, the performances, the stories, the scandal, the confessions, the hits. They wanted the public man. But the public man is not the whole man. Somewhere beneath all of that, he was still carrying old rooms, old lessons, old voices. He was still carrying the people who formed him before the world renamed him. That is one of the saddest and most beautiful truths about fame. The world celebrates who you became, but the people who helped you become it often live far from the noise. They are not on magazine covers. They are not listed in chart statistics. Their names are not shouted in arenas, and yet without them, the whole story may never happen. Phil seemed to know that. Maybe that is why he did not simply mention her and move on. Maybe that is why he brought her up into the light. He was not just thanking her, he was restoring something, giving public honor to a private debt, telling the truth in the one language the world around him would understand. A stage, a microphone, and thousands watching. For a man whose life had so often been framed around heartbreak, there was something quietly healing in that gesture. Because not every old memory is painful. Not every return to the past opens a wound. Sometimes it reveals the hand that steadied you before you even knew you were falling. And perhaps the audience felt something personal in it too, especially those old enough to know how life really works. By a certain age, you understand that no one makes it alone. Somewhere behind every strong voice is a first encouragement. Behind every risk, a first person who said, "Go ahead." Behind every survivor, someone who once noticed the hurt, before the rest of the world ever saw the strength. That is why the moment lingered. It was about Phil Collins, yes, but it was also about all the forgotten beginnings in people's lives. The teacher, the coach, the parent, the neighbor, the one person who said, "I see something in you," the one person whose faith arrived before your own did. The concert eventually moved on. Songs returned. Applause rose again. The machinery of performance resumed. But for anyone who witnessed that moment, something had changed. Because after seeing Phil honor the woman who first opened that door, the music sounded different. Not less powerful, more. The songs no longer felt like they came only from a star. They felt like they came from a life. From a boy once encouraged to step onto a stage. From years of pain and triumph and memory. From a man old enough to know that the beginning matters just as much as the glory. And maybe that is the part people never forget. Not the chart numbers, not the celebrity, not even the songs, though the songs will live forever. What stays with them is the image of a man who had everything the world could offer and still chose to stop, turn back, and honor the person who helped him take the first step. That tells you something about Phil Collins. It tells you that beneath the fame, beneath the heartbreak ballads and the drum fills and the decades of public life, there was still loyalty, still memory, still humility, still a boy who remembered what it felt like to be uncertain and what it meant when someone believed anyway. In the end, maybe that was the real performance that night. Not the singing, not the spotlight, not the applause. It was gratitude standing in front of thousands and refusing to be embarrassed by its own emotion. And for a brief moment, the whole arena saw something rare. Not a legend acting larger than life, but a human being made smaller in the best possible way, brought back to the truth of where he started. Reminded that before the fame, before the pain, before the world knew his name, there was a teacher who helped a child believe he belonged on a stage. And years later, under the lights of a concert hall, he made sure the world knew her name too.